Happy anniversary! Oh wait, you don't care about that and you want to know why the setup is different? Heater needs to work because we're approaching winter and we use a wood heater, okay? Now, back to happy anniversary. Now, I bet you're wondering whose anniversary it is. It's mine! On October 21st, I released the first episode of this show. Now, you may be saying, wait, your first video with the camera was released on January the 12th. And to that I say, well, both those answers are completely valid and true, but I like to consider the October one the unofficial pilot. So, happy anniversary! What should we cover for the anniversary? You have got to be kidding me. You may be wondering what a pal for Gary is, and to that I say it's the worst freaking SpongeBob episode to ever exist! I hate this episode with every freaking fiber of my body. Since I'm not gonna hold back, here I go. The first problem with this episode is that it's boring, Gary gets punished for no reason, and SpongeBob is so stupid. He's really stupid in this episode. Anyway, let's actually start this episode. And no, I'm not holding back. So our episode gets off to a pretty... boring. Darwin's right. This episode did get off to a boring start. But don't worry, boring is the least of this episode's problems. As you can tell, I really hate this episode. So, Gary, or SpongeBob, after Gary is holding up a rope, giving the illusion to SpongeBob that Gary wants to go on a walk, but SpongeBob has to go to work, so he goes to work, but it turns out Gary didn't really want to go on a walk. He just uses that rope to grab stuff that he can't reach when SpongeBob is gone, so he could watch his westerns, but SpongeBob feels bad that he wasn't able to give his pet a walk, so he thinks, how can I make my pet's life better? And as a pet owner, I know exactly how you feel. I love my K-Bar to death. He is the greatest thing in the world. I love to hug him. I love to play with him. Anyway, before this turned into K-Bar, top 10 reasons why he's awesome by Watch Mojo, let's get back to the... So SpongeBob decides to get a pet. SpongeBob gets the pet from like a fortune teller person that says the pet is cursed or whatever, and the pet seems really cute at first, but it turns out the pet is secretly a monster that attacks the other pet and the owner while they're sleeping. Keep that in mind for later. SpongeBob brings the pet home so Gary can meet the pet. So Gary tries being friendly to the pet. So SpongeBob goes to make some enchiladas or whatever. By the way, this is the first episode, or the first time I've ever heard enchiladas. So that's a neat fact. Or I'm not saying I hadn't heard of enchiladas till this point, but when I first saw this episode when I was little, that's how I first heard of enchiladas, which created the thing I want to marry for my whole life. Sure, those things are good. But anyway, back to the episode. So Gary tries to be nice to the pet, but SpongeBob, while he's in the kitchen, it turns out the puffy fluffy thing is really a monster and transforms into this horrifying thing, tries to kill Gary, and when SpongeBob comes back in, it looks like it's all Gary's fault. And at first I thought, well, okay, SpongeBob thinks it's Gary's fault because he didn't see it. Okay, that's alright. He'll find out later that it's Gary's fault and then realize and then apologize to Gary. So then later on in the episode, SpongeBob blames Gary. SpongeBob misunderstands Gary and thinks that Gary is the being rude. SpongeBob puts Gary and the pet, by the way, which is named Puffy Fluffy, to bed. But so SpongeBob goes to sleep and Puffy Fluffy tries to attack Gary, and it turns into this giant monster type thing. And then we have a battle between Gary and the monster, which is just Gary trying to keep the house from getting destroyed because the whole house gets wrecked. And all I have to say to this scene is, why? What? This scene is boring. There's nothing really... I mean, sure, it's Gary trying to put out the water, but I mainly just feel bad for Gary and SpongeBob's idiocy here, but I can forgive that for right now because my anger really comes at one moment coming up. So in this episode, SpongeBob's pet clam appears. You know his little clam that appears in some episodes and sometimes not? SpongeBob's continuity's a mess. But why, out of all episodes, did you pick to animate him in this one? Why? That defeats the point of having a pet, because Gary could have just spent the time with the clam, and we could have had an episode where Gary and the clam team up. Instead of this crap. SpongeBob wakes up, and he sees all the damage, and he automatically assumes it's Gary, someone he's known for his whole life. In fact, in one of my favorite episodes of SpongeBob, have you seen this now? He shows how much he he loves Gary, but he automatically assumes he caused all this damage. That's just so dumb. You've known this pet for years, but yet you automatically assume he did it instead of the new pet.
Gary! You put Fluffy down right now. Bad boy Gary. Bad boy. Bad Gary. Bad.
Did he just call Gary the bad boy? Did he just call Gary the bad boy? Gary was not the one holding Puffy Fluffy. Puffy Fluffy was holding him, about to kill him. Also, why did you keep your eyes closed during the whole thing? There's no way you didn't see that. I called bull. Anyway, the monster attacked SpongeBob. Gary saved SpongeBob's freaking life after SpongeBob was being an absolute jerk to Gary. But anyway, so how does SpongeBob thank his best pal?
Fluffy, wait!
You heard right. Freaking SpongeBob wanted that monster to come back. I don't care what these writers think. SpongeBob is not that dumb to where he would put his friends and his pet in danger. He's not that stupid. I can't believe he wanted that monster to come back. So here's my conclusion, but don't worry, after the conclusion the video won't end because I still have so much more to do after this episode, after the conclusion is over. The first problem with this episode is it's not funny. The second problem is that Gary gets abused, that Gary gets in trouble for no reason. SpongeBob never apologizes to Gary for the wrong things that he said about Gary. So Gary never gets an apology, and SpongeBob wants that monster to come back, which makes him really, really stupid. Do I really have to explain anything more on what's wrong with that? He did not apologize to Gary and wanted that thing to come back. I'm going to go over the 3 problems real quick. 1, Gary gets abused for no reason. 2, it's not funny, and SpongeBob is a comedy, so that's the most important element. 3, Gary gets abused for no reason, and Gary never gets an apology. I'm going to do something we've never done on this show before, a rewrite. If you're confused about what I mean, I am going to write this episode. So let's say an imaginary scenario that I was the writer of this episode, and I'm going to teach these writers how to fix this episode. So the first thing I would do to change this episode is cut down a lot of the stuff. Cut down a lot of the beginning. Cut down Gary watching the westerns. So in my version of the episode, SpongeBob would just feel bad that Gary had no one to hang out with because he would see Gary being alone, playing with the ball, playing with a ball by himself, and then feel bad. So the main core is still intact. So we cut down on the Krusty Krab scenes. We only have a little bit of it, and SpongeBob goes to get the pet from the gypsy lady like normal. So when he goes to get the pet from the gypsy lady, while he's making the enchiladas like normal, it bites Gary, but eventually, SpongeBob, let's say it's night and everything is going normal like how it would in the regular episode, but in my version, SpongeBob is sleeping, but let's say he had to get up to go to the bathroom for some reason, or get up to go to the bathroom, and he saw Gary fighting the monster. So SpongeBob steps in, grabs Gary, runs out of the house, and then the whole episode turns into a plot where they try to figure out how to get the monster out of SpongeBob's house, and they come up with different ways on how to get the monster out of SpongeBob's house, and it could kind of be like an action comedy adventure. And you may be saying, well, SpongeBob doesn't really do action, and in my vision, and to that I say, well, you know about the episode Doodlebob, right? Where SpongeBob and Patrick fight Doodlebob. I would say make that similar in tone as to how I would write this episode, and bam, that's how I would fix this episode. Just make it similar to Doodlebob or Crabboard and have the team up element, and I would throw in Patrick just in case for extra comedy because Patrick's my favorite character. Now here's my other idea for how I could rewrite this episode. So that was my first idea, now here's my second idea. You know how Gary meows, right? Like a cat? And it has been established that snails are the cats of SpongeBob and the worms are the dogs of SpongeBob. So I would make it be a giant worm monster instead of whatever that thing is. Seriously, what is that thing? Seriously, what is it? What was that actually, now that I think about it? But yeah, So have the worm bark, and you can have it be like a cat and a dog. That way it could be more believable to SpongeBob why they would hate each other, because you can establish that snails and worms have a rivalry, because it could be like cat and dog, because worms are the dog of the SpongeBob universe, and snails are the cats of the SpongeBob universe. And so for starters, on how I would change this episode, instead of Gary giving SpongeBob the rope, implying that he wants to walk, like how I mentioned earlier, have Gary rub up on SpongeBob's leg like a cat, because that would signify Gary's more cat-like elements, and have him act more like a cat, and make the worm monster more dog-like. That way it can be more believable into why the monster wants to kill Gary. Anyway. That's my plot too. I know it's not as good as my first one. Or, if you want to fix this whole episode in general without having to go through all this rewrite crap, have SpongeBob give Gary an apology! Now that we know that this episode sucks, based on my review, which is pretty obvious, where did the dog and the toaster get off to? Dr. T. Sano is here. Are you ready for your anniversary present, Tyler? I sure am. Why in the everlasting heck did you turn me invisible? What you wanted? You filthy idiot! I thought you wanted to be turned invisible. Why would I want to be invisible? I love my handsome face.
Well, at least you can be in the new Invisible Man movie.
Aha, very funny.